Hello CSL, welcome back to another video cast in a couple that have happened over the past few weeks, but today I'm pleased to say we're not going to be talking about a particular team. We're going to be diving straight back into the wonderful world of the conference finals and having a little chat about expectations, who we expect to get through to the elusive finals games. Today I'm joined back by I would like to say usual co-host, but the elusive co-host over the past few weeks, Miles. Miles, how is everything going for you? Are you enjoying the playoffs so far?
Yeah, it's good. Definitely good playoffs. Last round had quite a bit of excitement, even though some of the series were over pretty quickly. There was definitely some excitement, and I think the four teams left are four of the best teams in the league. So, you're getting like the absolute highest level of CSL basketball being played right now. I think that's awesome.
It's fine. It's good. I mean, you're more than happy to say you're just looking forward to the draft. I know you've got obviously four eyes on it at the moment.
I'm definitely excited for the draft. I am gonna sit down today after we're done here and figure out the players I'm gonna be scouting in this double scouting period because obviously I'm focused on pick number 4 and everyone is focusing on the top of the draft, but I do have two second round picks. I think one's in the 30s and one's in like the early 40s. And I got to make sure I get good players there too. So, there was a rumor floating around that I was going to draft Ding Yenyuhang at number 4. But I think I might actually scout him and see if I can get him at, in the 30s or something like that. So you might find me at some weird back of the road basketball games over the next week, doing my scouting.
Yeah, checking out the combine that's went up, I think, a couple of days ago. I haven't actually had a chance to look at that yet, but
yeah, it's been a crazy weekend, and I know I haven't looked at that once, but I'm definitely gonna look at that before sending in my last scouts.
yeah. I mean, it's drafts interesting, a little way away, but obviously we're here today to have a conversation about the conference finals. And like you said, it's going to be a fascinating set of series, really, because it is the top two seeds from both conferences matched up against each other. And perhaps we'll sort of dive in, I think, and we'll start with the East. Probably two of the teams that we kind of all expected to be there at this stage in the Toronto Raptors, led by Chile, who's leaving us at the end of the season for pastures new. But I'm sure he's hoping that he can see the his last few games in the CSL with a championship up against the Detroit Pistons. Probably one of the favourites, would you say, Miles, for the overall title, if you had to pick between the two initially?
Yeah, I definitely would say that coming into this series, Detroit is definitely the favorite for this series, if not the overall favorite. They're pretty close to it. They're a really, really good team, very balanced. Both starters and bench are very strong, so it'll definitely be difficult to beat them in a 7-game series. But it would be really sweet for Chile's final season with the Raptors. Not necessarily in the CSL. I expect him back once he's back from his Asian enlightenment journey to come back to the CSL. But it would be cool for him to win the finals in his last season with the Raptors.
Yeah, so let's start with the Raptors. I mean, in terms of getting to this point, I mean, they obviously had a fairly clean set of series, really. Would you say, in terms of getting here?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they've lost 2 games thus far in 2 series, and even losing those 2 games, it wasn't one of the first two in either series, so they never really felt challenged. So yeah, I mean, I would say that Toronto's gotten here pretty comfortably. Though I expected more from Cleveland, but Toronto is a really good team, and they're not easy to take down. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, I think Indiana were always going to struggle against a team like the Raptors. Just not enough talent there, not enough scoring to get them over the line. And for me, the Cleveland series, I kind of expected Cleveland to put up a little bit more of a battle. But as you sort of mentioned, the depth of this Toronto team, the way he's managed to turn it around from the Drummond injury that happened, and still come out of it with the right level of talent that you need to stay in the top of the Eastern Conference. But I mean, just on a side note, also picking up a lottery pick for next year is going to really propel this team even further, probably. But who would you say are the sort of the key players for Toronto in this
Well,
series against
so
a?
obviously, like the two best players on this team are DeMarcus Cousins and Kawhi Leonard. Leonard, depending on how you feel about defense, Leonard is the best player on this team, just because of his two-way ability. Cousins is not a slouch necessarily defensively, but he's not, a top five defender consistently like Kawhi is. But those two guys are gonna have to bring it every game regardless. And even if they both bring it, it doesn't mean that the Raptors are gonna win. I think the X factor here for the Raptors in terms of like the first thing I might check to see if they won the game or not is going to be which one of their star role players really stepped up, because they have a lot of good players beyond just Leonard and Cousins. They got Thaddeus Young, Nick Johnson, Jeremy Lin, Corey Joseph, Lance Stevenson, who got injured in the first game, which is a shame, but it's just a bruised abdominal, so I expect that he'll be able to play through it. Can one or two of those guys step up alongside Leonard and Cousins? Because if they can, I think Toronto can win this series. But can they do it 4 times? That's the hard part.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the question, isn't it? It's whether some of these top role players that they've managed to acquire can step up and can give them that little edge over a very dominant Detroit team. So do you think that this has kind of proven to the general managers in the CSL that DeMarcus Cousins can can be on a winning team and can be on a team that can push right the way through in a playoff series?
Absolutely. And I've never really bought into that in the first place. I think a lot of that comes from his reputation as an NBA player. And it just, obviously it's in the back of all of our minds when we see him in the CSL. But I do think Cousins is one of the players that you have to have in the right situation. In order to be on a winning team, he has to be surrounded by good defensive players. Because he's not going to be the anchor that Hassan Whiteside is, or a number of other centers are, and so that means you have to pick up the slack elsewhere. And on a team like Toronto, they are picking up the slack elsewhere because they do have a lot of really good defenders at every other position.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess on the other side of the coin, before we start talking about some specific matchups that you may have highlighted there, we'll just touch on Detroit again. Another team that really hasn't had a scratch going through in any of their series. I mean, Washington, managed to get the odd win, and Boston I think they got a couple, if I'm right. But for me, personally, I was a little bit disappointed. I kind of expected Boston to put up a little bit more of a battle. Or do you think that just Detroit were just too strong for them at this stage?
Yeah, I think Detroit is just too good to really be tested in the first 2 rounds, at least in the East. I think Boston could have given a good series to maybe Toronto. Maybe if like things had fallen the correct way in the playoff seeding, like a Boston Cleveland series would have been really interesting. I don't know how close we would have been to Toronto falling out of the top 3 seeding wise, but the East is very much a top 2 team. I mean, Cleveland should have been stronger, but without Jimmy Butler, is really tough for them. But it's really like top 2. You know what I mean? And when you're going to get up against Detroit, there's only a couple of teams that I think can challenge Detroit, and most of them are in the West.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, again, it's what's fascinating for me looking at the East when I was taking down some notes for this episode was both of the top teams in the East have kind of retooled slightly throughout the season to try and keep the longevity going. I mean, Toronto, obviously with Drummond's injury, made a short-term move that turned into a long-term move with the lottery pick. But likewise, Detroit moving Oladipo over, the likes of getting Holiday, and I think they've got a couple of picks coming over the next couple of years to keep that longevity going. So it's probably a fair point to say that we will see Toronto and Detroit back in a finals in the immediate future for that conference. Do you think that?
I feel more strongly about Toronto than Detroit in that sentence, only because I know that Detroit is going into this offseason. At least he's publicly said this. Whether he finds deals to his liking is another thing. But he's, John has said that he is interested in changing the team over, including trading Kemba. And so that to me means, I don't feel comfortable predicting Detroit's future right now.
I mean, I guess it comes down to how they do in this matchup as well, because we've seen teams get to the finals, win, completely rebuild like Chicago, and I've seen teams that get to the finals and all of a sudden decide they're not going to rebuild. They're going to just try and keep that core and keep that veteran presence together. So
yeah,
be interesting to see. So in terms of the matchups, I mean, you commented on the Whiteside Cousins matchup, which is probably one of the key factors in this series. Which guy do you think is going to potentially have the edge in this?
Well, I think that when you look at it like from a statistical standpoint, what it really comes down to isn't so much like can Whiteside step up as much as can Whiteside bring Cousins down to his level offensively. Like not trying to disrespect Whiteside. I mean, he's fine, but like Cousins needs to be 20 plus point per game Cousins on over 50% shooting for the Raptors to win the series, and Whiteside needs to stop him from getting to that point. Like you could look at the stats at the end of the series and be like, oh yeah, Cousins won that matchup. But if Cousins, shooting percentage dips, a lot, or if he is unable to get the same number of points per game or anything like that, like that's going to be kind of where it comes from. So, I give the edge to Cousins just because I think it's easier. A great offense can overcome great defense. But Whiteside doesn't need to neutralize Cousins. He just needs to slow him down.
Yeah, and I think if he manages to slow them down, then there's questions of who really can step up for Toronto in terms of, you mentioned some of these top role players that they've got, and with the likes of Stevenson, suffering that injury in game one, it's certainly going to be a struggle for them now. I guess in terms of looking at the guard situation, for me that was fascinating. I mean, Toronto have the likes of Lin and Rondo and Joseph, who are a mixed basket in terms of skills and abilities that can kind of balance off against anyone. Do you think that they have a chance of stopping the talented backcourt of Detroit in Holiday and Walker?
Well, they definitely gave Walker a tough time in game one. But I think overall, like at the end of the series, it's gonna be clear. It's gonna be Detroit's backcourt overcome Toronto's front court, because Toronto has the better front court, Detroit has the better backcourt, and by far, because Toronto doesn't have any guards even close to Kemba Walker. I would honestly, I would say Drew Holiday is the second best guard in this series, which means that Detroit has the two best backcourt players overall. No disrespect to Nick Johnson, who had a fantastic game one, but I'd still rather have Drew Holiday's all around game coming into the series. So I think Kemba Walker isn't going to have a game like he did in game one again, where he shoots 6 of 16 and only has 14 points. And so Toronto's going to have to take advantage of, and they did in game one, but they're going to have to try to take advantage of when Detroit isn't as potent as they usually are.
Yeah, and I guess game one for a lot of these top series is about sort of finding out strengths and weaknesses of other teams and trying a couple of things when you've got potentially a whole host of games to play. So really interesting that Toronto obviously got the one on the road, managed to slow Kemba Walker down. Like you said, Nick Johnson having probably a perfect game from his perspective. Do you think this is the way the series is going to go, or do you fully expect some of these, apart from obviously the likes of Walker probably bouncing back, do you kind of expect a lot of adjustments to happen through the next game?
I definitely think that there'll be adjustments from Detroit side. If you look at their fouls, Holiday, Walker, Caldwell Pope, and Whiteside were all in foul trouble. Walker's the only one who only had four fouls, and that limited Whiteside's minutes, limited Walker's minutes. And so Whiteside had 8 rebounds and 6 blocks in only 25 minutes of play, because Cousins kept getting him, to foul and getting Cousins to the line. I think that's something that Detroit's going to monitor and trying to figure out that balance because, they lose that rebounding battle by 16 rebounds, and I think a large part of that had to do with the fact that Whiteside couldn't play, as many minutes as he should have. 8 rebounds in 25 minutes is really good. If he had played, his typical,
Yeah, six
you know,
blocks in 25 minutes
yeah,
as well.
yeah,
It's
exactly. If he can stay on the court, like that's a whole nother thing. And so I think that's Detroit's going to be their first adjustment to make is finding out how to keep their stars on the court because that's a lot of foul trouble to your best players.
Yeah, exactly. And I wouldn't, I wouldn't even say if you can get Whiteside on the court all the time. If you can just get 30 minutes out of him and stop some of the fouls and the free throws that seems to happen in this game one, this will bring this balance straight back to Detroit quite quickly, I think.
Yeah, and the really good thing I think if I'm Toronto looking at this, the thing that I'm really what's I don't know what what I'm looking for. Encouraged by, there we go, is the fact that Lance Stevenson only played 7 minutes. So he
Yeah,
suffered that injury pretty early on, and they still won handily. So obviously, what you want him at full strength, and I think that Toronto still will need to try to play him in game 2 and see how much they can get out of him. I don't know what his percentage is at. Unfortunately, I'm not on the game right now, but if they can get something out of him, they showed though that they don't need it to win this series. And so I think that's something that's really encouraging.
yeah. I mean, I don't know in terms of what percentage he's going to be back, but obviously it says here he's out for 18 days with that injury. So
Yeah,
possibly,
bruised abdominal, from what I remember, is something that you can
yeah,
play through, but
yeah,
it's definitely like not uh like the easiest thing for the players to play through. Like they're definitely hampered by it, from what I remember.
yeah. It normally means that they can play, but normally their shooting percentages are normally pretty awful when they have that kind of injury, usually. But if you need just defense or you just need some other skills that Stevenson can bring other than just scoring, then he may be worth throwing in there.
Yeah, I think because they won game 1 in Detroit and game 2 is in Detroit. I think if I'm Toronto, I let Lance try to play maybe 20-25 minutes, just so you can see, because then
Yeah,
if he proves that he can play through it, then you can go back to Toronto and keep playing Lance and not have to worry about, oh, what am I going to do with the minutes that we have for him. Like, do I play Travis Ware more? Do I, what I mean? You don't have to like
yeah,
figure out those questions.
yeah. And I think for me, what I was surprised with in terms of this opening game was just from Detroit's perspective that he actually played Hazonja actually played some minutes. I mean, I expected him to completely be benched for this because he has the lethality to kind of knock Detroit out of this with some terrible shooting because he's definitely not fixed at the moment. So I kind of expect his minutes to be adjusted down as well, and some of those starters to pick up the minutes that he would have had.
Yeah, Gary's been really pleased with Hazonia ever since acquiring him, and I know that Hazonia's played throughout these playoffs, so I'm not surprised to see that he got some minutes. To be honest, in this game, I mean he's shooting 62% right now during the playoffs. So he's been definitely on the hotter end for them so far. But after this, honestly, I'd be surprised if Carr and Hazonia play more than 4 or 5 minutes each.
Yeah,
Just give
yeah,
dudes a
yeah. I
breather.
expect that lineup to tighten up a lot for Detroit in terms
Yeah,
of
this is the kind of point in the playoffs where like Dallin Paczynski playing 13 minutes, that's too much.
yeah,
Akil Carr
yeah,
playing 12 minutes, that's too much, right?
yeah.
Like I'm sure some of those came from Kemba and Holiday being in foul trouble.
Mhm.
But this is the series where you play Kemba, Caldwell Pope, and Holiday. And that's it at your 3 guard spots.
Yeah, absolutely. So opening battle to Detroit to Toronto, sorry, on the road. Where do you see this series going and in how many games?
It's gonna go 6 or 7 minimum. I don't see if it goes less than that. That means Toronto wins it, and I don't see that happening. Um, not in a short series. I think it's gonna be Detroit, and I think it's gonna be in 7.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm gonna play devil's advocate and go the other way and say that I think Chile's around for possibly another week, which means he's here for this series, hopefully, with access
Mm-hmm.
to the game. So I think Toronto win this in 6. I think that opening game is going to be difficult for Detroit to come back from. It's going to be that sort of tight margin.
Yeah.
So
Well, they'll
we'll
need to
see.
defend home court. I think game three and game four are probably the most telling parts of the series.
Game three will be huge.
Yeah.
If Toronto can hold that, then it kind of possibly swings it back in their favour, providing that they can nick both away games. Certainly, that'll give them a huge edge. But
well, if they get both away games and then win game three, then that's a wrap.
Yeah.
There's no way Detroit's winning 4 in a row. But I'm expecting Detroit to win game two, and then if Toronto takes game three, now you only have to win 2 out of the next 5 games. That's a huge difference compared to winning 3 out of the next 6.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's swing over to the Western Conference Finals. The 2 teams, obviously, the defending champions, the Sacramento Kings, up against their old nemesis of previous seasons. The usual suspects, really, as we kind of mentioned. The Phoenix Suns, who've always been around, sniffing around, but haven't quite got over the line. In terms of the Suns, let's start with them first. I guess in terms of their opening game against Oklahoma was probably expected, with Stanley Johnson missing for Oklahoma. Kind of a fairly straightforward win. Were you surprised at all by the Dallas and how straightforward it was for them in the end?
Yeah, especially after Dallas won games 4 and 5. I thought we were going to see Choke City Part 2, and that's even worse than the first Choke City, because first time it happened there, it was at least 3-1. This time Dallas was coming back from being down 3-0. And so I thought maybe, going back into Dallas, winning that game, game 6, if they could have done that, would have been like insane. But Phoenix closed it out. So I'm not surprised that it was a 6-game series, but I am surprised in how it was a 6-game series.
Yeah. I mean, I was surprised. I kind of expect that one to go to 7, and for me, I kind of expected possibly Dallas to get through. I hate to say that now, but I kind of just expect them just to have too much talent in the end. But it turns out that if you have Austin on your team, you can generally dominate most teams as expected. So
and also, yeah. One other thing, sorry, I just want to point out, if you look at all the teams that are still here in the playoffs, all 4 of them are pretty deep. They run deep rotations throughout the season, and so the thing with that is, if Isaiah Austin doesn't have a phenomenal game, that's okay, because you got these other guys who can step up. If Lance Stevenson goes down, well, he's not a key player, but you get what I'm saying, that they're not relying so much on certain 2, 3, or 4 guys, whereas with Dallas, they needed all of their stars to show up every single game, and if one of them wasn't there, Dallas wasn't going to win it. And I think that just goes to show having a deep team might be more valuable than having a star-studded one.
Yeah, and it certainly helps picking up someone like Taylor in the draft, who's just been on an absolute tear this season. Miles, I don't even know why we are discussing Rookie of the Year, because this guy, if he's not Rookie of the Year, seriously, the entire rookie department and every single general manager just needs to leave the league, and we need to close it down, because I know Simmons is probably the best player ratings-wise, but what he's done on the Suns this year, no one can even compete with that.
Yeah, just because every award has to have a little bit of narrative to it, just because it's boring if we, say it's one guy and then there's no other opinion. I'm with you in that Isaiah Taylor is going to be better be the unanimous Rookie of the Year, other than Doug's vote, because he won't be able to vote for him. The only thing that I could say is that Milos Teodosic had also a fantastic season, and Milos did it as the best player on a not so great team. So he had some help, but he's out there, carrying the Wizards more or less, whereas Taylor had kind of the security of knowing that, he's got such great players around him that, it kind of takes the pressure off him a little bit. Isaiah Taylor is the Rookie of the Year. There's no question about it. But I think that there's at least that angle that you can play with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's...
I have no words for that. I don't know why we're discussing Ben Simmons as Rookie of the Year when this guy is.
No, not Ben Simmons. Not Ben Simmons, Milos as number
No,
two.
I know. Even Milos. Milos has had a good season, but for what he's done on that team against with all that talent, just
Yeah,
crazy. But
yeah,
anyway,
absolutely.
let's move on to the Kings, who have probably had the bumpiest ride of all the teams. I'm going to say that because I'm completely biased.
Yeah.
But the opening game against Minnesota, they strolled through that more or less in the end, as kind of expected. I mean, Minnesota did a fantastic job getting to the playoffs. So, and then obviously they play against my Portland Trailblazers and managed to squeeze through in seven. Not feeling the after effects of that at all at the moment, but obviously they're the defending champs and they've proven they can, get through to this stage, beat the competition in front of them. I mean, do you think that's going to help them in terms of that experience and sort of being pushed that far in terms of finding out where their weaknesses and strengths are?
I would say that if they weren't playing other seasoned playoff teams, that are mostly full of the same rosters that they've had for the last couple of runs, that would help them. But when you're going up against Phoenix, who's been into the playoffs a number of times with Austin, White, Bledsoe, and then you go to the finals, you might face Toronto, who's been mostly the same team, just swap out Drummond for Cousins, Detroit, who's again mostly the same team. I don't think that it's going to be any help for them at this point. I think they're all on an even playing field now.
Okay, so I guess in terms of this one, we mentioned that you know the roster's pretty much the same as usual in terms of personnel. There's not many changes. Um,
I
do
think
you,
there's one big thing though that's changed,
yeah,
and that's that Sacramento doesn't have Nurkic.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and so now they're relying on I mean Desatnikov, however you pronounce that, he's just the starter in name only, and he played what, like 8 minutes this past game, 9 minutes. He's not really like the center. It's really gonna be McGarry who's matching up with Austin. I'd feel a lot more comfortable about Sacramento's chances if it was Nurkic down there battling with Isaiah Austin, to be honest.
yeah. And I think that's exactly why we managed to push them to seven, was because they were without Nurkic. If they had Nurkic, they'd probably cleared us in 4 or 5. So I think that is the massive difference maker in this, because we know McGarry's not particularly the greatest defender. He can match up against guys on any given night, but it means they're going to have to rely on someone who's a bit of a specialist like Moreland to kind of fill in some of those minutes. And I guess the question is whether both of those two guys combined can actually just slow Austin down a little bit, or slow any of their front court down a little bit. Do you think there's a case that he'll move Solomon over to hit that matchup?
Absolutely. In fact, I'd be surprised if he didn't try that a little bit in game one, or if he didn't go into game one going, well, if this doesn't work, then Solomon's my next play. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's absolutely that's going to be their best chance, because the other matchup is Michael Kidd Gilchrist, who he's fantastic, but I would feel much more comfortable putting a guy like McGarry, or even maybe sliding like Otto Porter down, and not being as worried about if I can match up against MKG, I would rather put the better defender on Austin, um, defensively.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of the Kings, is there anyone that you think, from the Kings' perspective, they will have the edge over the Suns in this series?
Yeah, whatever position Westbrook plays when Sacramento decides to play him. I'm amazed he didn't play in game one, though it may have been Sacramento trying to find out if they could win a game at home without playing a guy with a sprained toe. But Westbrook really should have played in game one. So that's definitely going to be an advantage for them. I don't care who he's matched up with the Suns, whether it's Bledsoe or Taylor. I would rather have Westbrook than either of those players.
Yeah, so I guess it's a case of, for me, it's probably White who I would put on Westbrook out of those three guys. So I guess it comes down to a little bit of a sub matrix battle to sort of kind of guess where the Kings are going to put Westbrook
Yeah, but
in.
at the same time, like if I'm Sacramento, I don't even know if I worry about that, because the starting lineup when they put Westbrook back in should be Westbrook at shooting guard and Porter at small forward. So if they move Okara White to shooting guard to guard Westbrook, then that means that Isaiah Taylor is going to be the small forward
Hmm.
playing against Otto Porter. And I
Yeah.
think if I'm Sacramento, that perfectly plays into my hand because now that means Porter's guarding Taylor. Porter's one of the best defenders in the league. That's like putting Okara White on Taylor.
Hmm.
And he's also a fantastic offensive player. And I mean, Taylor's not terrible on defense, but yeah, I would much rather have that matchup personally if I'm Sacramento. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's for the Western Conference in particular is fascinating because we've only really started talking about the starting five. If you look at that, the bench of both teams, they've got some players in there who can just turn it on. I mean, likes of Cousins. I mean, won't talk about McGarry being a bench player because he's not really, but Cousins for the Kings, and I mean, take your pick from the Suns, really. I mean, personally, I'd love to have any of those guys, really. Whitehead, Saunders, Hunter, Beasley, McConnell, Bradley, even in DA, or however you say his name. I mean,
I think it's actually NJ from my
NJ,
days playing NBA 2K. I
okay.
think.
Well, anyway, any of those guys can give you solid minutes and solid performance. So, be interesting to see how whether injuries impact this. I mean, there's some initial injuries to begin with, but whether some of these guys will have to step up and see whether they can do it in some more minutes. But I guess from your perspective, Miles, is there anything else in terms of this matchup that you think is going to be essential to deciding the winner?
Um, well, obviously, whose bench shows up more is going to be a big one. I mean, these are both teams that are going to rely on their starting five a lot. But if you can get, Isaiah Cousins or Sam Thompson will move to the bench once Westbrook starts.
Yeah,
If you can get stuff out of them versus like the Avery Bradleys, Malik Beasleys, T.J. McConnells for Phoenix, that's going to be the difference maker. Just realized by the way, Bledsoe only played 21 minutes in game one because he fouled out. T.J. McConnell actually played 28 minutes in game one, and Phoenix still won. So that doesn't make me feel good if I'm Sacramento for sure. But I think the big thing is just going to be how each of these seasoned veteran GMs will respond game by game. And it's going to come down to that because I think the talent level is mostly even. I think I would side with Phoenix a little bit just because I think their starting five is a little bit stronger than Sacramento's. Again, this mostly has to do with the fact that Nurkic is down. But I definitely am not counting out Sacramento because again, to me, I think they have the most talented offensive player in this series in Westbrook.
yeah.
And as you saw firsthand, he can single handedly win games. And if Phoenix can't figure out how to juggle their lineup when facing, Porter and Westbrook, it might be kind of tough. It will be kind of tough.
Yeah, I mean, the Nurkic injury probably swings the pendulum back to Phoenix initially, but I mean, thinking of it sort of from previous experience with the Kings Suns, I mean, I think last time I went with the Suns, and um, obviously you mentioned Westbrook and Porter. I mean, if they can get any sort of elite performance out of both of them, or even one of them on a given night, then that might probably swing the balance back from what would probably just a slight edge to the Suns to the Kings. So for me, this one's completely split down the middle. I mean, I think it's going to go to 7 games, and then I think it's just a case of who steps up. I mean, if I had to pick from the very beginning, I'm probably going to go with the Kings because of what I saw Westbrook do last series. But Miles, I mean, what do you think? Do you think it's going to go to 7 games, and or where do you see this one sort of landing in the end?
But coming into this series, I expected Phoenix to be the winning team coming to through the series. I think I can't keep harping enough on how big this Nurkic injury is, and also I think Phoenix has just done a masterful job of building a really a really well built team overall, and so I think those things are in their favor. And winning game one in Sacramento certainly helps their cause. So I think Phoenix is going to win it. Um, Again, this one's going at least 6. Uh, I just don't see how Sacramento goes down without winning a game or at least 2 games. And if it's game 7, I think it's a coin flip. But you know, we've seen road teams win game sevens before. So I think Phoenix can do it.
Yeah, I mean, kind of just summed up the both series here, and we've been talking for I don't know how long now, and we've both taken different sides of the matchups really in
And I bet
terms
I
of
bet if we pulled the whole league privately,
it'd be 50-50, I
it'd
think.
be 50-50, and I don't think anyone would pick less than 6 games coming even before the first 2 games
Yeah,
or the first game was played.
yeah, it's going to be a fascinating set of matchups and be interesting to see. I mean, even when we get to the finals, I think even then it's going to be a 50-50 matchup because all four teams arguably are easily as good as each other in terms of depth and star talent. So it's going to be fascinating to watch and see who comes out of it. And hopefully, fingers crossed, injuries don't have too much of an impact. The likes of Westbrook come back and we see the full rosters of all the four teams actually playing against each other, because that would be great to see from a neutral's perspective.
Absolutely. I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said that all 4 teams are balanced between like star play and having deep teams. I think that's what makes it so difficult to pick a winner, because it's not even like, oh, okay, these teams have different styles. Like, they don't have different styles. They're all really great defensive teams with a number of guys who are also very strong and very efficient offensively. Like, each team, you can point to like 1 to 3 guys that are going to be like their leading scorers. And then you look at the rest of the roster and you're like, oh, these guys can all also shoot the ball. Oh, and they also can all play defense. Like, find me one guy in the regular rotation for either of these teams, any of these 4 teams, that can't play on one side of the ball or the other. Right. And if they can't, like if you got Whiteside, who's like not a great offensive player, well, guess what? He's one of the best defensive players in the league. So it kind of makes up for that,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Similar styles, similar type of balance, and going to be great to watch.
Yeah.
I guess we'll come back in a few games time, see who the winner is, and we'll have a chat about the finals there and go into a little bit of more statistical depth, I think, with that one. But Miles, it's been great to have you on. Great to understand a little bit more about the conference finals. Best of luck with the scouting and the draft itself. Big decision happening in Denver, so we'll see what happens there. But great to have you on to chat about the conference finals.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on, and we'll definitely do this again. I'll make myself available for some Denver Nuggets exit interview that I know everyone's so excited to hear about. So
I've been really lucky with these. I've had some really interesting ones so far in terms of some of the franchises that have had some dramatic changes this year. So I'm sure we can find a story in Denver, no doubt.
all right, well, thanks again for having me on.
Thanks.